Provocative.
Adjective.
Intending to provoke or enthuse.
Acting as motivation or incitement towards reaction.
To evoke a change, an action, a transformation.
Conversations. Noun.
An informal exchange of ideas.
A personal, interactive sharing of thoughts and opinions.
Connection. Spontaneous give and take, talking, and listening.
Provocative.
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 Conversations.
Hello and welcome to Provocative Conversations with Erin Reeves. I'm your host, Jessica Shoemaker. Today, Erin will be speaking with Stephen Sheinbaum, the president and CEO of Merchant Cash and Capital, about courage, fear, risk, failure, and the spirit of the entrepreneur. Merchant Cash and Capital was founded by Stephen in 2005, overseeing all facets of day-to-day operations and charting the course for future growth. Stephen has grown the company from a single employee entity executing 3 transactions per month to its present status as an industry leader. Before founding MCC, Stephen practiced law for 18 years. Stephen believes a business can only grow when communication and trust are central and when leaders practice what they preach. Merchant Cash and Capital works hard to build a company that small businesses can not only trust, but can continue to rely on for ongoing support and financing.
Welcome, Stephen. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So our listeners have heard a little bit about you and your company and sort of all of the wonderful things that you and your company are doing. And what I'd like to really talk to you about today is this word courage. Not just courage in terms of sort of generally, being courageous, but really what is the kind of courage that you need in order to either transition from one career to another or to take your career to the next level? And I'd love to just start by asking you, how do you define courage and where does courage come from for you?
That was a great question. Courage obviously means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but in the context of my professional life and my business life, I think the courage really means not being afraid to fail. More than anything else. And over the years, I think courage is something that you build upon. But so many people get held back or are afraid to do things because they are afraid of failure. And but if you can overcome that fear and understand that you're going to fail at a whole lot of things and it's all fine, and very few people are great successes right out of the box, and you do all you can, that if you can overcome that fear and then you're willing to take on those challenges and risks, then there can be, great reward.
This concept of failure is so interesting because when I talk to people sometimes who are talking about successful people like yourself, people seem to think somehow that you have to have figured out this formula for success before you can take a risk. And what it sounds like you're saying is, no, it wouldn't be risk if you had it figured out. That you have to kind of reframe how you think about failure, that it's not failure, but like a stepping stone to success almost?
No, for sure. You end up learning vastly more from your failures than from your successes. And that's been a theme that was drilled into me at a young age. I played a lot of competitive sports, and I played collegiate sports at a very high level. And you grow up in an environment where, when you're coming off a field or a court, no one's really focusing that much on the good, but you're focusing, you're very, looking very inward. And sitting there with a coach or a mentor saying, what did you do wrong? What can I do better? I know you did 10 things right, but there's one thing we didn't do quite right. How can we get that better? And so that if you want to keep improving and keep building upon what you have and try to and not to be afraid of getting some really constructive, positive criticism, then it goes such a long way. I mean, I don't think anyone, I've started a few businesses, and I don't think anyone has the majority of things figured out before they start. And one of the mottos we live by is you sort of adapt or you die. So even if you do think you have it figured out, the one constant is going to be change. So all you can really do is you try to think things out as thoroughly as you can, and you try to have a plan, and then you have to constantly go back and look at the plan and say, did the environment change? Has the landscape changed? And be willing to adapt, right? And and the only constant really is incredibly hard work and effort. You're gonna wake up really early. You're gonna go to bed really late, and I think the other thing about challenge and courage and starting a business is people often have this view that they individually have to have all the answers themselves, and from my experience, that is a very sort of inhibiting and poor attitude to try and have, because if you want to build a business of any size, there aren't enough hours in the day. You have to have really bright people around you, and I think that to start a business, if you go in with the approach that I'm going to work just as hard as anybody, but I'm going to surround myself both, within the company and outside the company as advisors, whether it be a lawyer, whether it be an accountant, whether it be, a personal coach some people want to have, right? Or a board member, and you surround yourself with these people that can really help you, get to where you want to go and navigate and look at things and give you some fresh insight from a different direction. And if you have a thirst for that, and you're willing to absorb it, and you sort of don't care where the right idea comes from, just that you get to the right point and the right answer and execute it, then you can really, really grow, something from a small sort of hobby into a really large enterprise.
So these moments of failure, right? Like when you fall down, from your personal experience, what has given you the strength to sort of get back up? I heard this definition of success once that said success is getting up just one more time than you fell down.
Right.
And I hear a lot of people, just some of the people that we work with, some of our listeners, who talk about how do you get up when you fail? That, okay, I'm not going to take the failure personally, but how do you actually get up? I'd love to sort of hear either moments that you can think about or sort of some of the general insights that you've come up with as to how do you pick yourself back up, brush yourself off, and then get to the next sort of lesson that you have to learn.
To some extent, it's something that the ability to get up after you've been knocked down is something that builds over time. You almost build up like stamina in running. People, the first time they go to run, they run, a quarter of a mile, and then they can keep going, and they can keep pushing themselves a little further. And I think that, most people have gone through some tough or difficult times in their lives. And what most people don't do is they don't sort of take stock in themselves and build up, some real scar tissue, and instead of looking at that as, oh my God, that was a difficult time, if you say, wow, I got through that, I have been through tougher times than this before, I'm going to get through this. And if you take a while, sometimes if folks, especially younger folks, would look back at the instances where they were just inundated, whether they were in in undergraduate work or in business school or whatever, and they had this daunting amount of work that they had to accomplish before a test, and they had to learn it, and then and then they get through it. So when they're now in the workforce and they're, oh my God, I have to learn so much, if they look back and take a little stock and, all right, well, for the time I was an undergraduate in business school or law school or whatever, my God, how many times was I so afraid that I was never going to be able to accomplish this? But I put my head down, and you make little rocks out of big rocks, and you just grind your way through it, and that's what happens. But and the other thing that really helps is having great support systems and partners around you. And talking to, if people network and they belong to forums, there are very few people that have had a straight line up to the top. I look at Federal Express. Federal Express went bankrupt 3 times before it became one of the largest companies in the world. Right? It's phenomenal. Or you hear, Bill Gates, to touch back on something we spoke about earlier, which happens to me and is a real motivating thing for me. Bill Gates said that every day of his life, he was afraid that someone else was going to come along and put out better products than Microsoft. Right? And that fear of someone else sort of supplanting your position where you are, actually can be a great motivating factor as long as you embrace it and you don't let it, paralyze or cripple you.
So you're almost using the fear of being overtaken, almost like if you're running and the fear of somebody coming up from behind you and overtaking you use that not to sort of look back and say, well, who is it and are they coming, but to just keep looking forward and saying, I can run faster, I can run better, and I can't stop running because I should assume somebody's right there behind me.
Yeah, I think that's entirely true. I read a survey. I read a survey recently about CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and almost to a person, every one of them has been through something really tragic in their lives, both personally or business-wise. You run a business and it goes bankrupt. It's devastating, or you get divorced, or you lose a parent too early, or whatever it is. People have gone through really, 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 really difficult things, and it just propels you. You get through it, and then what's important to you as a person. You want, like for me personally, I'm lucky. I have 140 people that work here, and a real motivating factor for me is I try to give them an opportunity to grow, financially and professionally, and it's a really, really important thing for me to be able to give them that environment and that opportunity to grow, and because people did it for me, and I feel an obligation to try to pay it forward, a little bit, and that's a real big motivating factor for me, to provide for these young people who come in and work so hard, or to provide for my family. And to look in the mirror and feel really good.
And so one thing that comes up, and you've kind of touched on it in different ways, but I'd like you to talk about it more directly, is not just having the courage to take that first step, but once you take the first step, and even if you achieve a little bit of success, you actually need a lot of courage to keep it up, to take that second step and the third step and to sustain the courage. In your own life, have you found that sort of the courage you need to get going is different than the courage you need to keep going, or are they the same?
I think they're different. The hardest step is the first step. And I think that's true in so many things. In terms of sustaining the success, one of the things that we try to do here is we really try to have, goals that we set for ourselves, and we want to accomplish each of those goals. Right? And so it's the end of one year, and okay, this may have been great. Let's look back. That's in the past. That's fantastic. Now, what are we going to do to get better? And we set so we set a new set of goals, whether it's quarterly or semi-annually or annually or a 3 or 5 year plan, whatever it is. And we're all very, very goal-driven, and it motivates us to get to that next level. And then we try to tie, compensation or other types of rewards. Some are financial, some are non-financial, and that motivates us to try to keep going and keep getting to the next level and coming up with, and just trying to keep bettering ourselves.
So, and I really like the connection between sort of goals and courage, because if you have goals that you're working towards, it's easier to sort of draw on that courage as opposed to just drawing on it without something concrete in mind. But one of the other things that, people ask us a lot about is there's this difference between quitting and stopping, right? So, like, if you have a goal and you're working towards it, and there's a point at which you either decide, I don't want this, or it's not what I thought it was going to be, or it's not worth my time, I'm going to stop it so I can actually spend time elsewhere. But people seem to get stopping and quitting so intermingled that they sometimes keep doing things that they should have stopped, and they quit at things that they should have kept going at. So how do you tell the difference? And not that there's like one answer, but for you, how do you play through that difference?
It's funny. I look at I've never quit anything in my life. I don't feel, and I think that's a very common trait that you would see in successful people. They're very driven, right? But I think that changing course and accepting that you thought you had to go down one road, but hey, I better change and go down a different road, and I better stop taking this approach and change that approach. That's one of the most courageous things that you can do. That's the hardest part. The most courageous thing to do is to lay out a plan that you think has been well thought out, and to be going down that road and say, oh my God, for whatever the reason, either some of my assumptions were wrong or the world changed and we have to change course, right? That's that is true courage. For a business leader to say, I am going to change my business model, or we were doing this and it's wrong and we're going to change and that's it. And it's actually easier. That's a more courageous thing. It's easier to just keep towing the same line, and then you're going to fail, right? It's not standing pat. If you don't adapt and change, then I think that's a weaker thing to do, but an easier thing, because change is always hard, and you can't get complacent. And again, if you surround yourself with good people who can point out why you need to change, then it's a phenomenal thing. I mean, I'm really lucky. I've always known. I used to sit on boards. When I was in a prior life, I used to practice law, and I used to sit on boards and consult and advise clients. And it's really hard when for a business owner it's very easy for a business owner to get stuck in the trees and not see the whole forest. And so I've always really wanted, since I started the business I run, I've had investors and board members that have started and sold phenomenally in a phenomenally successful manner, and also failed several times in businesses that they've started, and the insight that they give and bring to the table, and the support that they can give you to change course when you have to, is something that really has been a great thing for me, and I would recommend to anyone trying to start a business.
So can you take us, to the extent that that you're comfortable, take us through one of those moments, right? One of those moments where you said, I am going to take this risk. I'm actually going to start this new company. What is the thought process? Like, what are the questions that come up for yourself in your head? How do you answer those? How do you pick up the phone and say, hey, I need you to talk me through this. I got this great idea. I don't really know if it's a great idea. I mean, just take us through sort of one moment where you made a decision to start a company, and what that kind of, if we were in your head at the time, what it would have sounded like or felt like.
Well, when I started this company in 2005, I had already been practicing law for about 17 or 18 years. And part of my business was, raising money and consulting for small publicly traded businesses or privately held businesses. And someone came to me with an idea and asked me to raise money for them and I raised money for them, but my investors had asked me to cut a deal that I thought was fair for them, and I was unable to do so. So the investors a few months later came back to me and said, that business that you brought to us and you wanted us to invest in, why don't you do this yourself? You've been building value for other people for the last 15 years. Why don't you do this? But at that time in my life, I had a wife that didn't work. I still have a wife that doesn't work. She works at home. I want to make sure I'm being politically correct here. She works very, very diligently and hard. And I had two daughters, who were probably 13 and 10 years old. And I didn't have a lot of money saved. I'd recently bought a home, and I had this opportunity, and it was really, really scary to sit down and talk with my wife and say, okay, if I take this risk, I'm giving up, a very sort of thriving and successful legal career, but I have this part of me that just has this need to be more entrepreneurial. And so we decided to bunker down and save for a little while. I remember going and talking with my parents about it. And I had watched my father start a very successful law practice. And I went and spoke with a few friends of mine who had started businesses before me, and some of whom had failed, and some of whom who had been extremely successful. And I sat down and really took stock in the fact that, okay, if I fail here, it's not going to be the end of the world. It'll be a setback. I'll go back and practice law again, or do something else. And at the end of the day, I was really willing to take that leap and go for it because I was confident enough. I wasn't afraid of failing. I was just afraid that if I failed, would I still be able to support my wife and my children?
Got it.
And once I said, okay, well, I have enough faith and and confidence in myself that if I fail, I'll still be able to go back. Maybe I'll have to take a step backward, but that's okay because this could really catapult me and get me, financially and emotionally to where I wanted to be. And so it was scary, but I decided to do it, and I'm really, really glad I did.
So did anyone say, "Don't do it"?
Yes, a lot of folks said don't do it, and that's because, the better situation you have, it's harder to give that up.
Right.
Right. So I was in a really good place in my life, and people thought that it was a risk that I really shouldn't take. But most of them came around to my line of thinking in the sense I said, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? So I'm going to fail, and I'll start another law firm. I'll figure it out. I did it before. I did it again. I've lost plenty of other times in my life and in things and got back up, and I'm still here. I'm still standing.
Is that the scar tissue that you were talking about before? So every time you take a risk, so that when you are about to take this big risk, you had all of this belief in yourself about your ability to get through something like this.
No doubt. I had personally been through some really difficult times in my life, and I had seen close friends go through some really difficult things, and that expression, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it just makes you weaker, but there's a lot of merit and truth to it, and you just realize that you're gonna be okay. I've lost before, and I've grown from it, and let's go for it.
And so what are ways in which you impart those lessons to your daughters or to younger people in your life? Because it seems like this isn't something that's taught in school, right? Like if you don't have an adult, whether it's a coach, on a football team, mm-hmm. or a dad or a big brother, somebody teaching it to you, you don't always get it. So what are some ways in which you and, some of our listeners, if they're interested in it, can impart some of these lessons to younger people in their lives so that they grow up with this knowledge that they can fail and build scar tissue and come back up and do it again and do it better?
Yeah. I think a lot of it's communication. We have in the business that we run, we have very much of a team building approach. Mm-hmm. And we try to talk about the failures. I run a finance company, and we have all these young folks who make decisions on that involve pretty large amounts of money. And our sort of rule is, I don't care if when something goes wrong and we lose money on a deal or whatever it is, when we go back and re-look at the opportunity, the question is never, why did we fail? And look back at it. The question is, okay, let's go back and look at it, and knowing what we knew at that point in time, did we make the right decision? And then what happened afterwards? And let's try to learn from it. And as long as everyone brings maximum effort, then we're all going to learn together. And none of us are perfect, and we're all going to make a lot of mistakes. And if you surround yourself with people like that, then that's the key. You really just have to be willing to sort of look into your failures and understand it, and just try not to make the same mistake twice. But you can't grow without making mistakes. Right. So we try to tell that to our younger people. I mean, I'll give you an example. We ask people to change. Sometimes someone comes and they say, I have a new idea. I want to start a new division, but I'm afraid to do it. So why are you afraid to do it? Because I'm in a really good position with you now. And we say, okay, why don't you take 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, go start this division, and I will give you an insurance policy, okay? If that doesn't work, I will put you right back into the position that you were in before you took the risk. Okay? Now do you want to do it? And they're like, oh my God, yes, definitely. Okay. So if people, if they can't get there themselves to understand that they're going to be okay, the worst is they'll go back to where they were before. Then I try to give them that support for them, and that sort of unleashes their desire and ability to grow out a division.
That actually reminded me of how many times, even in my own life, like if I said I wanted to do something, there were people there who were willing to mitigate the risk for me.
Right.
But it still takes somebody saying, hey, I have this idea, and so you're not going to sit down with everybody and say, hey, do you have ideas? Can I help you come up with ideas? But if they do, then you're willing to support them by mitigating some of the risk, but also showing them that risks are worth taking, it sounds like.
No doubt. The other thing is I have two partners in particular. I have two partners that taught me a great lesson, right? These two young guys started and sold what is now Expedia.com, right? And they changed the way that people purchased hotel rooms in this country, right? And their view was, some people are afraid to fail, right? Other people, and what these guys taught me is you can't be afraid to be really successful or be great. I mean, someone is going to come up with the next, iPad, right? Someone is going to create the next widget that changes the world. And you really can't be afraid to go for the brass ring, and someone's going to change the world. Why wouldn't it be you?
Right.
So we're implementing all this technology and this and that, and these guys and they're like, hey, someone woke up one day and started Apple. Someone started Google. We changed the way people purchase travel, right? Just as much as you can't be afraid to fail, you really can't be afraid to be great and go for it.
To kind of step into that. Into that possibility. So as we wind down, and this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much. As we wind down, what kind of last piece of advice would you give? So there's someone sitting there listening to this conversation who maybe doesn't want to start a business, but maybe just wants to take a risk within their own career, step up, raise their hand for that next level, want to start that new division. They want to do something that they have not been doing because they're scared. What would be your advice to them in terms of the next thing that they can do to move forward in that direction?
I would tell them to think about it from every possible angle, try to create a plan if they can, right? Run the idea by some people that they really, really respect, and people that will be critically and brutally honest with them. Mm-hmm. Ask people to punch holes in their ideas, right? Mm-hmm. And if at the end of that exercise, on balance, they still think it's a great idea, then to raise their hand and speak up and show some initiative. Because the worst that's going to happen is someone, whomever they go speak with, is going to just have a ton more respect for them. If someone comes and shows some initiative and says, "Hey, I want to do this, and I'm here to do it and mitigate a little risk for me, but I'm willing to take some risk, but help me and let's go for it." And people will respect that.
And I think the powerful part of your advice is that you're also not going on a whim, right? Because you are going with a plan, and a plan that's been vetted, and thoughtfulness. And so when someone hears that level of thoughtfulness from somebody, it's respect, and they're going to want to support you. It sounds like if someone came to me with a plan and had thought it through, it would be really hard for me to not want to support them.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Sometimes the hardest part is you have to find really smart people who are willing to be sort of brutally and critically honest with you about it. But if you can do that, and you can find those people, they're out there. People want to help. Anyone that has started a business wants to help someone else start a business, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
I completely agree with you on that, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us, for sharing some of your own insights and your stories, and I just really appreciate the time that you've taken.
Oh. Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully, it helps some people out there. So thanks again.
Absolutely.
All right.
Back to you, Jeff.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Provocative Conversations with Erin Reeves. For more information on our work at Nextions, you can head to our website at www.nextions.com. That's NEXTIONS.com. Thank you so much for joining today's conversation. It wouldn't be one without you.
Provocative.
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 Conversations.